Thank you guys so much for coming. Just as a heads up, Drew let us know yesterday that he was feeling under the weather, so he unfortunately won't be able to make it. But I'm really excited because we're still joined here with two amazing guests. Just as a quick introduction, Audrey is the co-founder and the CEO of Curious Cardinals, an edtech platform she started while she was a student at Stanford. She has since scaled the company to serve thousands of K-12 students through a network of over 700 college mentors, earning recognition from Forbes 30 Under 30, CNN, and The Today Show. And Rob Reich is a professor of social ethics and of science and technology at Stanford, where he directs the Center of Ethics in Society and is a senior fellow at Stanford HAI. He recently returned to Stanford after serving as a senior advisor to the US AI Safety Institute and is the co-author of System Error, Where Big Tech Went Wrong and How We Can Reboot.
Which you all need to read if you haven't yet.
Very nice. But yeah, if we can get a warm round of introduction. So as a brief overview for what we'll be doing today, it'll be around 30 minutes of structured Q&A, and then we want to open up the floor to everyone in the audience if you guys have any questions. So I guess the first question I have for you both is an icebreaker. What's one thing for both of you guys have changed your mind about regarding AI in education over the past year?
You want to go first? You probably have a bunch of them, I would imagine, from all the quick work you do with Curious Cardinals.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I do need to say, I quote Rob in every single workshop I teach. I have been teaching AI workshops to parents and students for the past 2.5 years. I have taught over 150 of them. I write a weekly newsletter to tons of parents all over. Last night's was on AI. And every single one I bring up Rob, who introduced the framework to me. So that's been consistent of how can we use AI to amplify, not replace. So thank you, and this is so fun because I'm gonna be learning from him alongside you all. And we were at the Common Sense Media Summit last March, and Rob was alongside Saul Khan, and all I wanted to do was listen to Rob. He's amazing, and he's my favorite AI education philosopher, and I always learn so much by listening.
I don't pay her for any of this.
But what's changed? I would say how existential things are. I'm an optimist. I am very positive. And in these workshops, I've loved to share optimism. I've loved to share empowerment. The thing that I did warn was like, I am case zero for growing up online. I am what Jonathan Haidt has referred to as the anxious generation. And we've learned from my generation that kids left to their own devices with these social media, phones is never a good thing. And there should have been more guardrails in place that affected us and our generation drastically. And let's not make the same thing happen to AI if we don't have any guardrails in place. This past year though, the past 6 months, I've gotten a lot more nervous because I've heard not just from students, stories, parents, teachers, even students at Stanford have told me how ubiquitous the use of these tools are, how few people are actually doing their homework, how people are delegating their thinking to AI. So I've gotten a lot more scared, and it's felt a lot more existential as someone who's usually always cup half full.
I'm going to give two quick responses. One of them, I'll confess, is a bit snarky but sincere, even though it's a bit snarky. And one, just more straightforwardly, a response to the question about what I've changed my mind on. So the snarky thing where I have changed my mind is I thought that, if we could roll back time 3 or 4 years ago to when social media seemed like the thing with all of these unintended consequences, negative externalities, the anxious generation stuff that Jonathan Haidt and others have warned us about. I thought we were coming to the end of peak tech bro, but I was wrong. It turns out we have not yet reached peak tech bro, which seems astonishing as a fact. That's worrisome. The more straightforward way to answer the question is that I feel like to pick up this thread that Audrey already mentioned about designing or building with AI to try to substitute for or automate or replace what a human can do with greater efficiency or perhaps higher quality, as opposed to designing and building with AI to augment and amplify what humans do. I feel like there's a growing awareness in the space of education in particular that maybe there are some ordinary, as it were, back office, or tasks that are worth automating, but that the core of the enterprise of education, learning between teacher and student, will greatly be assisted by building with augmentation and amplification in mind rather than automation. And here, important point, it's essential for people who have the technical skills to build with AI to be in conversation with those that they're trying to build for, teachers, schools, educators, students. I'll just add one illustration of this, and here I think there's a good story to tell, because I think there's lots of signs of things going on in AI and education that show evidence of this. If you roll back in time just 10 years, so it's 2016, at that point the Turing Prize winner Geoffrey Hinton, of course just a few years ago, then Nobel Prize winner, godfather of AI, deep learning, et cetera, anyone with a technical background knows of Geoffrey Hinton. He gives this famous talk in 2016 in which he says, it's just completely obvious that we should stop training radiologists. We should stop training radiologists now because deep learning is going to do so much better at image recognition for radiologists than the humans will do. It's a waste of time and money to educate anybody to be a radiologist. Today, 10 years later, image tools are better than they've ever been, and there are more radiologists than there've ever been before, and they get paid really, really well. Radiologists have not gone away, and explaining why that happened, in contradiction to Geoff Hinton's prediction, is in part one of the differences of building with augmentation in mind rather than automation. Because to put it again in a kind of, I don't know this to be a fact, but when Geoff Hinton said this, I'm going to predict with a lot of confidence that Geoff Hinton had never talked to a radiologist when he made this prediction. If he had, he might have said something different than he did.
What do you think were some of the aspects of a radiologist that were hard for AI to automate, and how do you foresee that kind of continuing to play out in the future?
Yeah, there's this really interesting article written about a year ago called "The Algorithm Will See You Now," which tells the story about what happened over the course of the past 10 years in radiology. Now, many of you in the room are young enough, you've perhaps never been to a radiologist, but if you've had an x-ray taken and a radiologist has read your x-ray, what percentage of time currently do you think radiologists spend reading images of their job?
10 minutes?
How much?
10 minutes?
What percentage of their overall time? Not an hour, minutes in the hour or something. But like you would guess it's 10% or something, or 40%. 50. Yeah, it's less than 40%. So a radiologist's job encompasses far more than image reading. And then one of the other things that you learn if you dig into this, in particular this article, "The Algorithm Will See You Now" reveals, is that the people who designed image reading tools have been able to do so with a great degree of success for certain use cases, but edge cases and corner cases they're not necessarily so great at. And really importantly, the image reading tool was built just for doing that, not integrated into the overall workflow of a radiologist. So when a radiologist moves from one hospital to another, there's not always continuity. Radiologists, the image recognition tools built for certain types of image tasks don't necessarily work for different image tasks. And it's a good example of a hyper-confident prediction. It's just totally obvious that you should stop training radiologists now. Would have been better informed by talking to people who are radiologists to learn, are you doing more than just reading images all day? What's the workflow look like? How do we build with the workflow in mind, with you in the loop? And that's in part what's essential about education. Do you build to automate the teacher? I would suggest you've already framed a really bad question.
Any comments?
I just couldn't agree more. I think that I hate to paint things as a binary, but I find that the education space, it's quite a binary. On one end of the spectrum, it's completely antiquated, afraid of tech, not using any technology at all, want nothing to do with it. On the other side, I'm building the least sexy business in San Francisco. Everyone's asking, why aren't you building a mentor bot? And they're building tutor bots and mentor bots. I've worked with thousands of kids, I speak to parents and students every day. No one's asking for mentor bots. Their kids are desperately seeking relationships and engagement and connection and positive role models. The chatbots, I think, are the bane of our existence in humanity. And so for us, we've always thought, how can we use AI to amplify, not replace? And I have our team grapple with that question every single day. What are only humans uniquely suited to do, and what can AI do? And part of why I want us to grapple with that, one, we always want to be embracing the tech. Tech can be an extraordinary tool when used thoughtfully and intentionally. But two, we're motivated by impact at scale. We want this to be something that can affect not just 10,000 kids, but 1 million kids. We want to make Curious Cardinals embedded in the social infrastructure of the world and pave the way for the future of learning. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we leverage technology, because it is really hard to scale humans. And so, for example, we record all sessions. In the past, mentors would submit lesson notes. What did they learn? How did it go? One mentor would spend 20 minutes writing the most thoughtful summary. One mentor would just say, "Good job today, Noah." And then the parent would be like, "What did they learn today?" I don't think our mentors are uniquely suited to write lesson notes. So how do we use AI? AI automates the lesson notes every time. When we first launched the feature, I would always make edits and tweak and wasn't satisfied with it. It's so good now. I read, it's supposed to be human in the loop. It doesn't submit on its own unless a mentor doesn't submit after 4 days. I always read, and it's doing a better job than I would, and it's fun when it picks up on details that I would have forgotten in the summary after. But there's countless instances of how we're doing that, and we're really questioning what can only humans do and what can AI do. And I think when you don't build for human in the loop, like an example I'll give is we've built all sorts of learning products. One is our learning roadmaps and agenda, which adjust dynamically with each session and meet goals up front. And it's not super easy and intuitive design how mentors can edit and personalize it. And so kind of two things happen. Either one, mentors don't use it at all, or two, they use it so literally. And we're like, you're this amazing Stanford, Princeton, Rhodes Scholar mentor. You have more intuition and thoughtfulness about what this kid needs, how to drive this session, than our AI-generated learning plan. This is a tool meant to help you, give you guidance, give you inspiration, but not do the thinking for you. And so that's an example of a tool where we tried to augment, but it wasn't sufficiently built with the human in the loop to be optimally as effective as we were hoping it to be.
Can I just add one thing to this too? I mean, I think I am on team Audrey here, building with the human in the loop, the teacher in the loop, the student in the loop. But even if you thought you could summon a bunch of enthusiasm, which to say the obvious, there is lots of enthusiasm to build mentor bots or tutor bots. Even there, you face the same design choice of building in an automating versus augmenting way. So just to illustrate this, Sal Khan builds these automated tutors in a way that don't just as quickly as possible deliver you an answer, but try to tutor you through solving the problem. It's meant to augment you and the learning process. If you go now to any of the big, models, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, typically in the past, 6 months, there's a radio button beneath the prompt bar that says, I want to code, or often I want to study, I want to learn. If you click on the I want to learn button, the user design flips into an augmentation frame rather than an automation frame. Without clicking the radio button, put the math problem in, immediately you get the answer. Click the radio button, I want to study, it's going to do more of a Sal Khan thing. This automation augmentation distinction can be equally well used for developing the tech itself and the user design, even if it's not keeping a human in the loop. I mean, in these cases, of course, the student, the prompter, the user is in the loop. But building tech where the human is always kept front and center and augments the human is also possible even in a chatbot, mentor bot style, where the student is interacting. What's the user design look like? You can choose automation, you can choose augmentation. And VC and Silicon Valley is imagination, their imaginations are so cramped with the dreams of automation. It's as if the natural law of AI is to automate things away rather than to open up the possibility of augmentation. And that's I'd say a deep flaw in the current ecosystem here in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, for sure. I think as you were talking about Jeff Hinton in 2016, it feels like 2016 is like 100 years ago in AI terms.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
systems and these chatbots are getting more advanced than ever, and I think a lot of us here, obviously, we're students, and there's a lot of uncertainty with we're in school. What skills should we be learning? What skills should we be developing? And just in general, like for a young person now, what do you think are the most important skills to foster?
Please answer that first.
All right, me, want me to go first on that? I will, let's first give some facts about this. So you're probably aware of this. All of you have, I'm guessing, have some Stanford connection. What is the current pattern of enrollment in computer science classes the past year? Up or down? Down. For the first time in 15 years, enrollment in computer science is going down. Majors, still good. But enrollment in overall classes for the first time in 15, 20 years going down. Why is that? I don't think we know the answer yet. You might ask, well, what courses are people taking instead? But one hypothesis is that if you thought that majoring in CS and getting coding abilities was a ticket to professional success, the AI moment has given you reason to worry about that. And don't fail to get the technical expertise, but you better not do that only. Supplement with some other stuff. So here at Stanford, symbolic systems, maybe mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. In my dreams, I like to think philosophy is now more popular. There is a modest increase in philosophy enrollments if possible, but to give a direct answer to your question, I mean, in general, my work at Stanford in the past decade has been motivated by the desire to see a new kind of person emerge from Stanford University. Not just someone with extraordinary technical skills who's an amazing builder, and then a bunch of people who take social science and policy classes and go to law school and become the general counsel or the governance and policy person at the company, or maybe go work in government, and then a few philosophers, say. But rather people that combine and integrate into their single brains technical abilities, policy and social science abilities, and more humanistic or philosophical frameworks for thinking about what's worth building. And HAI, for example, is one effort to institutionalize this orientation, a multidisciplinary orientation to thinking about frontier technology. It's not let the people in AI go build the model, and then the rest of us outside of the computer science department can play with and study the model. It's what would happen if you put the rest of the university in the lab at the moment of creating the algorithm. What might be different? That's the one of the bets of HAI, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. Audrey,
I'm so excited to hear your answer first. This is a question I grapple with every day because our goal at Curious Cardinals is to help kids figure out who they are and where they want to go and equip them with the mentorship tools and resources on how to get there. It really means helping them find their North Star, preparing them for their future. Right now, a lot of folks think of that within the context of college. I like to say college is our Trojan horse. We're really preparing kids for an AI world. And so what matters most? First and foremost, the ability to learn. That's one thing for certain we know will not go out of style. And that's something I tell parents all the time. Model for your kids that you're trying new things, you're learning new things. Kids build this conception that learning happens K-12 in college and you're done learning. Once you enter the workforce, or hopefully now at Stanford you're realizing learning never stops, you're constantly evolving. Second, there is critical thinking and problem solving, research and questioning. I hate that prompt engineering is called prompt engineering because it sounds so much scarier than it is. As someone who was a history major in my time at Stanford and thought I could do nothing in engineering classes, I think it should be called something different. Prompt engineering is essentially being able to ask the right questions. I argue that I'm a better prompt engineer than our VP of engineering with 15 years of engineering experience, who is amazing. Not because I'm a better engineer, I cannot code. I can use Cursor and Cloud Code now, but I cannot code. But because I'm really good at asking the right questions. I was president of the debate team in my short time at Stanford. I got my research published in the historical journal, Herodotus. And so knowing how to ask the right questions, being very specific and tailored and narrow in your use, that's so powerful. And critical thinking and problem solving. Creativity, AI is an accumulation of anything that's ever been done before. So what's creative, what's new, what's novel, what humans bring to the table, storytelling, and people skills, the ability to connect with people. The thing that really brought this home for me is we do a timeless skills in an AI era pitch competition now twice a year. We did our first in summer, we're doing a second in May, and the goal is to have kids discuss what are the timeless skills and work towards developing projects where they solve real world problems and pitch their work, and use these tools hopefully in amplification ways, not to do the work for them. And the kids, there was hundreds of kids who submitted projects, there were 12 finalists. These kids were so polished, gave the best pitches, and then we had Q&A. So the judges asked them questions. And that was so profound for me, because I realized, oh my God, these kids might be reading from scripts. They use ChatGPT to personalize their pitch script. Who are you with nothing? Who are you with no screen, with no notes? That's gonna be so powerful. Who are you when you show up at a conference room or at a discussion table with nothing but yourself? And so the ability, I would say that's storytelling, that's communication skills, and that's emotional intelligence. The ability to connect with others, engage with others. When so much of the tedious, menial, entry-level work can be automated, what do you bring to the table? Those are some of the key things. And then the final thing that I will say is kind of like the timeless quality is motivation. If the barrier to create has never been so low, the bar for what we're all gonna want to engage with and consume is gonna be that much higher. So for an unmotivated kid, it has never been easier to cheat. And that terrifies me. For a motivated kid, if you're a motivated startup team like ours, who works like 12 to 14-hour days, 6 days a week right now, we are in the golden age of entrepreneurship. Our whole team is doing more than we've ever done. My co-founder was an aerospace engineer at Stanford. We've had other engineers. The past 6 weeks, he's decided he wants to code our new platform tool that we're launching. He put YouTube videos on weekends. He's literally coding a platform that 3 years ago would have taken 3 engineers 3 to 6 months. And so we're motivated, we're working so hard, and we have this incredible accelerant to take us further than we ever could. And so that's the final thing with kids, and I think young people, like, we need to figure out what motivates us, and that is the most precious thing to preserve and celebrate, because we don't know where the world is going, but to have the motivation to care enough.
Great answer. Yeah, I think, like, to sum up both the points, the barrier to entry has never been lower. To create something, it matters more about what you decide to create, what kind of values you decide to foster that guide that decision. And when we look towards education policy, it's a very legacy system. It's remained pretty much the same for the last how many decades. In this new world where we're fostering more of like the development of people and their own values and what they want to create, how do you think the classroom should change? What kind of policies should we start to implement to enforce this new direction we want to guide students in?
Yeah, I mean, one other thing which you might not know about me is that before I went to graduate school, I was an early participant in the Teach for America program. I taught 6th grade in elementary school for a few years. My own graduate training is from a school of education. And by studying the history of education, one of the things that you learn is that any type of social ill or problem is often, the first blush response to some social problem as well. We ought to require that students learn about this in the classroom in order to either make sure they get it. Let's make coding skills a language requirement in all schools everywhere. That comes up over and over again, for example. Or make sure you try to teach people to avoid something as well. And then all of the social problems of society get foisted on the back of teachers who are struggling just to get by every day with what's going on in the classroom. They're already chock full of requirements. So how should schools change? How should schools adapt? I have a couple thoughts about that, but I'm going to use them to reflect about Stanford first, and then maybe backtrack to the K-12 system. Partly because of what I just said, I don't want to throw all of the responsibility in the back of teachers or principals, school administrators to change all of what they do to adapt to the current age. Of course they can and should do some of that, but not solely their responsibility. And so part of what I think should happen is that you build an array of opportunities that sit adjacent to the school, adjacent to the classroom, but aren't always expected to be the full responsibility of the classroom. So in the Stanford version of this, professors, once you get here and you begin teaching for a little while, you come to realize that You thought that the reason the university existed was to allow education to happen and get a degree, and so students apply, come to get admitted, and then go to classes, and that's the main thing that's happening here. And then when you look around and experience it for a while, you realize, no, that's not the main thing. What's the main thing? The main thing is the extracurricular life that students have. The AI club that the undergraduates decide to cook up, for example.
It's a good club.
And to put it in kind of the language of a social scientist, the social capital that gets developed on a college campus like Stanford, where the incredible people who live side by side with you in the dorm, the clubs that are around you, the opportunities to learn and do things outside the classroom, that is an incredible rich opportunity. And many students decide, for good reason, to make that the main thing, and the classes are the icing on top. But that's when I say, how should Stanford adapt to this new age? Mandate deep changes in the curriculum? No, I don't think that's the right way to go. Allow bottom-up opportunities to flourish within the campus environment that then students can opt into, and the culture grows in certain ways. Stanford certainly has this entrepreneurial culture. That seems to me a better strategy than somehow saying, we need to update the curriculum, let's mandate it from above.
The question was how should school
Yeah,
change?
how do you envision school changing to instill the right values and directions we want in students?
There's so many things. I think that what's tough right now and what I'm seeing, how it will actually tactically happen, is we need to educate and empower adults and admin and teachers with these tools. There's a very overwhelmed, there's a knowledge gap, and there's defensiveness, and I feel like I've been observing the past 2-3 years, and unfortunately there's been way less progress than I would have hoped because these dynamics continue to play out. But aspirationally, if those weren't an issue, I think one thing is more of a flipped classroom, where classroom time should be way more of, what we should do is the reason that kids can use AI to cheat, it's so easy to cheat, is how they're assessed today and all the incentive structures. So I say to parents too, why is your kid so susceptible to use AI to cut corners on their learning? They're so anxious about getting a grade, an A on Friday's test or an A on the essay, that of course they're not going to take the long-rounded study route. They're going to do the quickest thing to get the immediate answer. How do we change things? I did hear a Stanford student told me her teacher said, I don't care if you use AI, but I'm going to grade you for good quality work. So if you give me AI slop, you will get a bad grade. A recent grad from Harvard was part-time on our team, and she saw how AI enthusiastic we were. And she handed me a deliverable, and I said, this is AI slop. I didn't hire you to take the thing I told you to do and put it in one single prompt and hand it back to me. I could do that. I hired you because you're creative, you're thoughtful, you're going to imbue it with intentionality that I wouldn't have brought to the table. And so I would say, how can we really rethink the classroom of, if kids have access to these tools, how does the tools not get in the way of their learning? How do we raise the bar for how we're assessing kids? How do we make assessments maybe not just based on grading the best essay, but more measurable objective outcomes, i.e. Who can sell this thing, who can get subscribers or readers and engagement from this thing? So what are objective numbers that demonstrate real world impact? Because that's how you're going to use AI in the world as an adult, is using these to go further and be an accelerant, not to cut corners and do something that's good enough. So I would say we really need to rethink what are the incentives in place and what are we assessing kids for? I think the other thing with AI and where it can be dangerous is it's way too broadly applied, and the more narrow the use case, the safer it is. So my favorite AI tool to share with students is Notebook LM. Please does any of you use Notebook LM? Can you raise your hand if you do?
It's a great product.
It's a Google tool. I think it's amazing. Talk about human in the loop. It's so amazing interface. You upload your files, your textbook, your syllabus, the John Green YouTube video you upload all this so you control the input. And then what I think is amazing about AI for learning is modality. I didn't know K-12, didn't know at Stanford, didn't know until I started a company that I'm ADHD, because I learned so differently than everyone else. So talk about AI to amplify. How did I get away with not knowing I had ADHD? I'm the craziest note taker, I have great executive function skills. So sometimes folks turn to me and they're like, you can use a note taker. And I'm like, I am using a note taker and I'm taking notes, because that's how I engage and retain information in the way that works for me. This is AI to amplify me, because if someone says something and I miss it, and then you ask someone, you miss the next thing. I know I have a safety net, I have my AI note taker. But the way I learn and engage best is taking my own notes. And so modality, I think, gets at that really well. Dyslexic, ADHD, neurodiverse learners, it can meet you where you're at. And for Notebook LM specifically, you put all those inputs in. You can have it make a practice test, an audio version, a mind map, flashcards, a slide deck. It's so cool. It's such an awesome study tool. And that's the type of tool that doesn't get me fearful of cutting corners on learning, but just augmenting and meeting kids where they're at. So I would say more of AI for specific narrow use cases, and then more of rethinking the incentive structures, what we're evaluating, and how we don't make it so tempting to use this to cut corners.
Interestingly, I also recommend checking out Notebook LM if you haven't already. Who is the lead designer of Notebook LM at Google? It's someone they hired who's an author, a writer of books. And this was a tool that he wanted to help support his own versions of doing research, not a tech person who conceived of the basic thing.
That makes so much sense.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. I think now we are around 35 minutes in. I wanted to open it up to the audience in case anyone has any questions. Yeah, feel free to ask away.
Thank you for sharing your insight, and I feel like for people who are in education, like we all agree with that. I feel it's sometimes it feels like common sense for educators, but then it's like such a novel thing for the people who are trained more like in different fields. But I also think that I'm seeing these kind of like bridging incentives right now with like fundings and VCs. I guess I was just having a question about like how I guess like me, I'm kind of like in the field of education, I'm also seeing myself an entrepreneur. And I feel like I sometimes operate in two different logic or two different worlds. Like as a researcher, as an educator, I really care about learning. I care about relational learning. I care about like the motivation, the emotional side, because that's what like I know of. But then in the kind of the capital world, or kind of this like the people who are like acting really fast, who are getting the most resources compute-wise, or like the biggest like basically like microphone to talk about what they're doing, I feel like they're operating in very different logic, which is like basically like optimizing for speed, for scale, for like impact in very different ways. And it's really hard for me to kind of like join them or see what is like the middle ground where I can still care about these things that I think are common sense for me as a researcher and educator, while kind of winning the game or like being successful, raising enough money so that I can also be part on the table there. Because the VCs, they would be like, oh, like parents don't want to engage in it. They want it to be augmented so that they can like do whatever they need to do, and then they want other people like teachers or like the apps to take care of their children for them. And I feel like there are a lot of like kind of like, I don't know what that is. Is it lack of awareness? Is it kind of like the tradition of how things are done? I feel it's like really pulling to a direction that feels like separate worlds to me.
I'll offer a quick thought about that really interesting reflection. It'll tie, at least in my head, what you've just said ties to this distinction between automation and augmentation, and what I said earlier about Silicon Valley having a cramped imagination when it comes to what you could build with AI. So much seems to go naturally in the direction of automating tasks, automating work, rather than augmenting people. And a friend of mine named Roy Bahat is the head of an early seed stage investment firm, venture capital firm in San Francisco called Bloomberg Beta. And he wrote this post a couple of years ago on Medium, which you can look up, called The Case of the AI Crane and Loom. And his basic idea is there's a history of technological innovation that's automating. The loom automates the process of weaving. The combine automates the process of harvesting the field. And then there are a whole bunch of things that are augmenting. The construction crane allows humans to build skyscrapers that they couldn't build without the crane, and amplify what a human can do. A microscope or a telescope augments a human. Eyeglasses amplify our capabilities, or correct them, as it were, in ways that don't replace eyesight but augment us. And he says, Silicon Valley venture capital firms seemed only to be investing in AI looms. Where are the experiments in funding AI cranes? And that's partly why I say it's not as if the technology necessarily somehow inherently is automative. It's about designing. And our funding structures seem to have privileged, for no necessary reason, automation rather than augmentation. And that's part of where this divide that you described comes in. And just to give one modern day example, at Apple, which remains one of the world's most valuable companies, among Steve Jobs's many famous lines, one of them is, what is a personal computer? You may remember the line, a computer is a bicycle for the mind. It's a lovely phrase, but notice that it is not an automating tool, it's an augmenting tool. You can do things with a bicycle more efficiently, amplify your capacities, but it doesn't do it for you. Where are the AI startups that are building bicycles rather than replacements for humans?
Love that. And I'll answer a little from that founder perspective, leaving Stanford, who hears the noise and it can be really tempting at times. I would say you just have to stay in your own lane and you have to be radically aligned on what your mission is and what you're trying to do in the world. And so you have to also understand that often the founders' incentives and venture capital's incentives are not aligned. And so we've raised $7 million in venture capital total. We actually haven't raised money in 4 years. We burned, I'm not sure I'm saying that out loud. We did not burn much money last year. We've been really capital efficient. We're basically at break even. We are in control of our own destiny. I'm obsessed with Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game. I think it applies to school, it applies to building business, it applies to life, which basically is finite game is like getting an A for Friday's test. Infinite game is not just getting an A for Friday's test, it's learning the material for life. And so it's super easy when you're a Stanford dropout founder to just get on the venture hamster wheel. You're type A, you're speaking to these cool shot investors, and I did that. And I'm not opposed to raising venture again at all. I think it's a tool. But it can be really distracting and it gets you actually away from what's the mission and what's it all about. In Silicon Valley, there's so much noise. You hear the valuations and the amount raised, you have no idea how much revenue that you have. You have no idea how many people they're actually impacting and what the value of the company is behind all those flashy stats. And so you have to really understand what is your mission, what is your driving force, what is your why. It might be I want to do the thing that's going to get me the most capital and the greatest exit in the most amount of time, and that's a personal decision, then that's fine. If you want to do something impact-oriented, I think education and healthcare share these both dilemmas, but also exciting opportunities and things that give us optimism to build. You have to build in your own way. And so it's exciting for us that, again, we get to be in control of our own destiny, and we get to, instead of having to burn ourselves or drive ourselves off a cliff and potentially not do this company. I remember feeling the pressure to grow faster at an earlier stage when we weren't ready. And literally my co-founder and I one day walking home from the office, it was like really late, and I almost cried being like, I don't want to stop building this. Like, I love what we're doing. I could be building this for the rest of my life. So why are we risking driving ourselves off a cliff? We should just ride this at our own pace. One of our investors is the founder of Webflow. Webflow also had a pretty unconventional path with pauses between funding rounds. There's another education language company called Cambly, and I spoke to the founder last week. They also took a pause between funding rounds, and that seems like kind of almost a taboo thing in Silicon Valley to wait this long. But I know that right now, I told Rob I'm busy. He said, are you actually busy? Because founders, you're always really busy. We're growing more than we ever have. It takes time. It actually feels like we've really figured things out. Now things are way more predictable and repeatable, and we get to figure out, not throwing spaghetti at the wall, does this stick, does this work, but this is working. What do we optimize? Do we innovate more here? Do we optimize there? We have the reins of our business, which it takes time, especially in a human services business, to get there. And so, again, where I think will venture be the right pathway or not. We are motivated by impact at scale. Again, like my North Star is serving millions of kids. I don't want to build some boutique education thing. That's great for some people. That's not my personal driving force. And so venture might very well be in the next year or two, we'll see a great tool to bring my North Star to life. But it's not the success metric. The success metric is how many kids we're serving, how much more scalable we're building this, the durable impact, and hopefully again, like this is something I'm doing for life. And so I think that's some personal reflections that again, these things can be really taboo and folks don't talk about in the Bay Area. And it's about finding the people who have that value alignment and really understanding what's your driving force.
Great answer.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
My question is, in an AI era, do you think a generalist or specialist will have a better time or success? I know you kind of touched a little bit about that. I'm just curious about your perspective on that.
In the job market, you mean?
Just like in general, in job market, like.
Yeah. The Stanford D School has a phrase which I think is helpful, or an image here, that the goal for every person should to become a T-shaped person. You have breadth and some specialization. So this is a way of, what's a philosopher likely to do? Ask a different and better question. We don't have to choose between breadth and specialization, or general and being specialized. Try to get at least one specialization. After all, that's general education requirements of the university, and also do a major. It's just another version of that. I suspect partly what you're thinking though, and let's say it out loud, at least this is what your question elicits in me, is that AI could well be a specialist in lots and lots of things. So it might help for a human being to be able to take advantage of what AI's deep expertise is able to elicit, but then, as Audrey was saying, have the general expertise to be able to prompt a tool that is expert in lots of different areas. And the real thing that the human being, will remain essential for is being able to deploy the tool. And that might be enhanced by the more general orientation. That's the best I could do, but if that's what's on your mind, I'd be curious what your thought about it is.
That T-shape philosophy totally makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Audrey, do you have any thoughts, or?
Rob crushed it. I'm reading Ratings right now though,
Oh, yeah, that's
which
good.
feels very relevant to that question.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you have any ideas on how we might address the issue of motivation in students? How, if a student with lower motivation, they're more likely to cut corners by doing their homework with AI. How might we begin to address that? I know you mentioned flipped classrooms, but how can we also, I guess, create tools to help students feel more motivated? Like, what are your ideas on that?
It's all about connecting learning to the why, helping kids figure out why it matters. We're actually doing there's an amazing book I recommend called The Disengaged Teen, co-authored by Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop. Rebecca Winthrop was on Ezra Klein on a podcast called Rethinking Education. And I'm doing an event with her in Burlingame on February 13th, so you could come, and I'm doing an event with Jenny Anderson, her co-author, in the spring. The book validated everything we believe with research, and a lot of what they talked about is kids don't know why they're learning what they're learning. They don't know why it matters. And so part of their research, they introduced this great chart. On the x-axis is engagement, on the y-axis is agency. And you can kind of put kids into one of four boxes. High engagement, high agency is explorer mode. This is the kid who's genuinely curious, who's learning things on their own, who wants to know why something is the case, who stays after class. The right here is resistor mode, which is high agency, but low engagement. And that's the kid who often is deemed the problem kid. Often they have learning differences, or they have challenges at home. There's other reasons why they're acting out in certain ways, and it's kind of a cry for help, but we often call them the problem kid. There's passenger mode, which is low agency, low engagement, checking the boxes, going through the motions. And then there's achiever, which is like a perfectionist kid, and there can be the healthy version of that, and there can be kind of the toxic version of that, where your grades are your identity and your sense of self-worth. And what the book shares and part of the research is kids oscillate. You're not always just in one box. Sometimes it depends on the teacher you have, sometimes it depends on the class you have. but how, like the pinnacle being, how do we get kids to explorer mode? And what their research shares and what we see at Curious Cardinals, it's connecting learning to something that matters to a kid. And so one of my favorite stories is there's this boy named Matthew who came to us as a 9th grader, and he had no idea what he was interested in. This was also in the pandemic, and his dad was like, anything to get him engaged. And we asked him what he's interested in, all these one-word answers, and I'm like, what do you like to do in your free time when no one's telling you what to do? And he said, play video games, to which his dad rolls his eyes. And I go, what if we could teach you how to code a video game? Finally got him to lit up. He goes, oh, that'd be pretty cool. Matthew went on to learn how to code a video game, design a video game. Oh my gosh, his video game was more impressive than what software engineer peers of mine could build. It was amazing. He is an engineering student at Michigan. I actually just recently looked at his GitHub and looked at his LinkedIn. Every summer he's interned at video game companies. His GitHub is his whole built out portfolio of other games. This was a dad who, and the dad also updated me at every phase of the journey because he was so desperate. He really was so lost for his kid. I also told this story to a teacher at his school, and she goes, that was Matthew? Because she never saw that Matthew. And we have so many stories like that, but I really believe it's like passion excavation, it's leading with curiosity. Every kid has something in them. It's often not evident to a parent. There's other things that manifest. And how do you unlock motivation? You help a kid find their why. You help them connect their learning to things they actually care about in the world.
I'm not going to improve on that. That was great.
Great answer. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, if anyone has it. Oh, I guess.
Hi, also a TFA alum.
No, great.
My question is related to a comment you made, Rob, about how we change schools.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, the answer isn't to overload teachers, which I appreciate, but you also mentioned that the answer could be like to enrich this extracurricular environment.
Yeah.
And one of my concerns is that almost presupposes like resources, right?
Right.
Like who has the richest extracurricular environments? It's the school districts, with the parents with tons of extra time, who can maybe hire these like programs to come in and fund the field trip across the country or this cool science experiment. So how do we ensure that education technology, that AI, and that the changes we implement because of those things actually benefit all students and don't widen the gaps that already exist?
Yeah, super important question. Among the issues that we face is that the introduction of new technology is not inevitably solved automatically because the technology is available. There are broader social structures, in this case funding systems and how educational opportunities arise in the first place, that create the enormous disparities we see in the United States and the burdens that teachers face. And a new AI tool will have all of the problematic features you just described, disparities across different schools, different uptakes and access, in the absence of these broader systemic or structural changes. So, that's another invitation to be able to think in a system-wide sense so that the person tempted by the idea that the disruptions brought on by being a technical builder alone are enough to solve the problems. Let me use this differently from a recent paper I think is worth paying attention to in AI. This paper from about 8 months ago by the Princeton computer scientists Arvind Narayanan and Sayash Kapoor, called AI is a Normal Technology. And it was meant in sort of a contrast to this other thing that came out in April 25, AI 2027, like AGI is coming during the Trump administration. No one is ready, ring the alarm bell now. And the AI as a Normal Technology paper, they are not skeptics about AI. They say AI is going to be a revolutionary, really important, technical innovation. But what the AI 2027 people fail to recognize is that the innovation frontier does not immediately translate to the dissemination of the technology, and that the dissemination of a technology lags, sometimes by decades, behind the innovation. How do we get a really powerful technology to disseminate? It's not only a technical question, it's a question of exactly what you pointed us to, funding streams and ways of getting access to lots of different places. And here we're leaving the realm of technology, but anyone who's been a teacher realizes that the United States has a rather unusual structural approach to the provision of public education, not by making it a federal thing, not by making it a state thing, but by making a local effort, funding through local property taxes, different school districts that govern things. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of educational entities that control, in certain respects, their own efforts. So the idea of going to scale quickly in education is, not a simple one. You have these political jurisdictions to contend with. That's, by many people's lights, a design feature of American democracy: local attention, local flavor, local color to education. But for these issues of access, it's a bug. So the answer has got to be, don't think only as a technologist, think as someone who's interested in society and politics.
Yeah. I joined the board of a charter school in Oakland this past year, and it was such a stark contrast to a lot of the educators we're in contact with at some of the most well-funded, well-resourced private schools. And you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's just like AI is not even in the discussion. The charter schools focus on changing their mission. It used to be getting kids to and through college. That's not serving kids. Kids are in debt. They're now changing to more apprenticeship model, trade, different pathways for kids. And I'm the one ringing the alarm of, what about AI? Are we teaching kids AI literacy? How are we gonna make sure they don't miss the mark if we're trying to prepare them for better futures? This needs to be core of the conversation, and so that's been alarming for me and concerning, also super motivating for the work we do and the importance of AI literacy, and we need more folks who've been in TFA classrooms to take action here, because there's so much work that needs to be done.
I guess a follow-up to that, are there any policies that, on like maybe a federal level or maybe a local level, that excite either of you in decreasing this inequity?
One recent thing, you see the lag time here, is simply getting all schools, all publicly funded schools, K-12, to have broadband access was recently completed. And that took, federal funding and concerted action. But providing the funding necessary to get broad access in the same way in earlier generations, it took a few decades once telephones came into existence and telephone networks broadened to ensure that everyone had telephone access, even if you didn't have the money to pay for it on the market. So, we're moving in that kind of direction. Like, think back to conversations people had sometimes a few years ago. Has Google search become a kind of public utility? Everyone should have access, like before you went to the public library and you took the encyclopedia off the shelf. Now Google search is the equivalent for that, or Perplexity, whatever. Should we convert these companies into public utilities in the way that electricity was done, telephones to some small extent? That sounds horrifying to anybody in Silicon Valley, that you should nationalize Google search in order to provide it on a free basis to everybody. But if you become as ubiquitous and important, essential for all people to have access to, that's in certain respects what the history of new technologies and new opportunities looks like. I'm not arguing here to nationalize Google or Perplexity. I'm just suggesting that the solutions in the past have been far more radical than what we've allowed ourselves to imagine here. And simply providing the funding for access while preserving the private character of the company is, far simpler than imagining let's create PG&E out of Google search.
Great, that's a great perspective. Alrighty, one more question maybe?
Yes,
Last question?
please. So this is more of a predictive question. So for context, I teach in the program for writing and rhetoric first year, second year students, research-based writing. And I will say changes in the last 2 years have equated what would have been changes that took 10 years before. So my question is, your prediction right now, I believe my first years learned about ChatGPT in their second year of high school.
Right.
If my math is right, in 5 years, the first years I'll be teaching will have encountered AI in elementary school. Now, given the mismatch you're pointing towards between the goals of tech companies, where it's more automation and profits, and us educators just drowning, I can't break that barrier.
Right.
So it's up to you guys to break the barrier and hopefully give us a little bit of, I don't know, if there's hope, then tell us. If it's an ongoing concern, what should students know as they go out in the world? Because this is different, for sure, in my view at least.
You have a thought?
I'll say something really small and I want you to say. I forget the philosopher's name, but he said, with the invention of the ship came the shipwreck, with the invention of electricity came electrocution. My fear is with the invention of AI came atrophy of critical thinking.
Atrophy of critical thinking.
I'm terrified of that.
Yeah.
I want
Yeah. The frequency with which younger people adopt new technologies, and this lag for people who are older in first even orienting themselves to it, and then figuring out how to do their jobs or have human lives with them. That's a frequent phenomenon, so we can actually learn something from history there. For the reasons that I know you're thinking of and that Audrey just described about the atrophy of critical thinking skills, that is certainly an obvious concern. I'll say, to return back to the very beginning of the conversation, what have I changed my mind about an AI? Okay, we're now, as you said, 3 or 4 years past the introduction of ChatGPT to the world and the novelty and power of these incredible new large language models, and the rapid acceleration of their capabilities in these base model, foundation model modes, where we've only had a little bit of time to begin building applications on top of these foundation models or base models. And it's going to take some time to build genuinely well-designed, well-constructed applications that are fit for purpose in education. And I think we will begin to see some of those in the coming years, so long as the venture capital world expands its imagination to allow for augmenting possibilities and beyond. But I think there's going to be a market demand for them, because the kind of sentiment that you just shared is, of course, a very common one. My last thought is that, I would hope that people don't, stick their heads in the sand and say to themselves, well, I'm going to stick with the last generation technology and hope it goes well. I think experimenting with the tools is super important, and so the occasional refusal stance that I experience from some people, I find understandable on a human level, but as a way of simply being open to and exploring what the AI tools enable, the refusal posture is one that forecloses the opportunity to learn instead of remaining open. And foreclosing an opportunity to learn as an educator is an odd posture to take.
The last final thing I'll say is, we've said 2 things, and putting the 2 together should scare us, which is, one, we're fearful of atrophy of critical thinking, kids cutting corners on their learning. I work with a student one-on-one always since I founded Curious Cardinals. This fall we wrote an op-ed on how AI can change education for the better and the worse. And I said, what do you actually think? What's the positive use cases? And she said, personalizing learning. I was like, what do you actually think? And I was like, she's just regurgitating me. And I said, come on, tell me, take 15 seconds to think something with this generation. Learning comes from friction and struggle. Tech is all about eliminating friction and struggle. So that's, and I see this with this generation. I was like, pause for 15 seconds. I don't even need you guessing, really think about it. And she goes, I actually don't know, because we're not allowed to use AI in my school. And so I kind of only use AI to get the answer immediately. And we talked about how, at least with me with Spark Notes, I had to read the Spark Notes, analyze the Spark Notes, think about how the Spark Notes assess a passage applied to the homework question, and do some thinking. She just gets the output spewed to her directly to her question. And she admitted, we use it for cheating. So no one's teaching us how to use it right. And so she didn't know what it could be for positive. So I think we can't just avoid this tool, but there's this atrophy of critical thinking bucket, and then there's this the barrier to entry to create has never been lower, and the bar for what we all want to engage with is that much higher. So if we're creating a generation of kids who don't know how to think critically, have no patience or resilience because they're just used to Uber this, DoorDash that, ChatGPT that, yikes. Kids who can't think, kids who can't grapple with challenges, kids who can't do the hard work, and then it's never been easier to create, so it's that much harder to create really high quality things. Like, this is why education is the single most important thing in the world. Education is investment in the future. That's why, like, ed school, whoever's in education, we need more smart people to enter education. I will say hiring can be difficult because I do a Venn diagram. One circle is super ambitious hustler startup people, and then my other Venn diagram is education, social impact people. A lot of education, social impact people are not willing to work hard enough to be at Curious Cardinals. They wouldn't have fun. This is not what they want. They want a little bit more work-life balance. They want a little less intensity. Why does everything feel so urgent? It's really hard to find people in that middle ground. So like the folks who care about education, technology and innovation in the future needs you.
It's a great point to end on. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.